The skylark and thrush, the birds of the bush, sing louder around to the bell's cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. Welcome to the Troubadour Podcast, and today we will be reading The Echoing Green by William Blake. Now, if you're following along, this is the second episode of William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. And right now we're focusing on Songs of Innocence, but from time to time I may bring up some Songs of Experience. Because if you remember from the introduction, and if you didn't listen to that, that's okay. Just stick with this one. We'll give you enough to get started with it. But what you're getting with the Songs of Innocence and Experience is how Blake put it, showing the two contrary states of the human soul. And so there's a focus on both sides of what he considers the contrary states of the human soul, innocence and experience. And although these were written several years apart, they were published in 1794 as one piece of work. And Blake, unlike all the romantics and all the writers of his time, chose not to do mass printings and with the Gutenberg press and the printing presses as they were developing and becoming much more honed as an efficient tool of printing. He chose to hand make his work. He hand colored all of his books, and that's why he was only able to have a very much smaller reach. Luckily, though, we have preserved many of these works, and we can see the actual illustrations as Blake wanted you to see them. As a romantic of the 1700s, particularly, he became as important for his literary work as his visual work. And we're going to look at these as we look through the poems. We're going to look at some of the illustrations and how they are impactful for the meaning of the poem. Now, and you'll see why in a moment. Now, before I read the poem, I wanted to read the poem. I wanted to give you a quick little discussion of the poem, and I also wanted to read a poem that some people believe is the contrary state in the Songs of Experience. So you'll often find there are many poems that are echoed, to borrow from the title of this poem, The Echoing Green, that are echoed, that are contrasted with, compared with in the Songs of Experience. So, for instance, there's a poem called Holy Thursday in the Songs of Innocence, and there's one called Holy Thursday in the Songs of Experience. There's the little boy lost and the little boy found. So you're getting comparisons. Now, they don't all compare exactly. There's a poem I'm skipping. So last time I read the Songs of Innocence introduction, which is also colloquially called The Piper. And now I'm reading Echoing Green. Before this poem is The Shepherd. But I think I'm going to do the pastoral poems. There are 3 pastoral poems. I'll probably do them together separately because they're very, very short. It's The Shepherd, Spring, and the Lamb. Those are the 3 pastorals from the Songs of Innocence. But before we get into that, last time, and I've gotten some comments about this, only a few, so if you guys are interested, please help me out here. But I got a comment of somebody who read the work as I suggested to their child. Now, I am claiming that this work is one of the better works of classic poetry to read to very young children, especially the Songs of Innocence, but even the Songs of Experience to some degree, but especially this. And one of the things that Blake what I think you'll realize that Blake wants you to realize is that the child will get a very simplistic, surface level understanding of the poem. And you'll have intonations, understanding of connotations, feelings that are perhaps a little darker, as we'll see in this poem, even though it's in the Songs of Innocence, that a child will probably not pick up on. And you're both correct. And he made a point of that you are both correct. He, like Rousseau and many of the Romantics, did not take children to be miniature adults. That had always been the view. And there was a change that childhood was a unique stage of life. And to some degree, it was almost fundamentally different than being an adult, that there was a shift of maturity that was completely different. And he is kind of playing on that idea that there is a shift, there is a difference between being an adult and being a child, and a child is a completely different state. So my exercise, so what I was talking about in the Piper in the introduction to William Blake, I'll put a link to that post in the show notes at troubadourmag.com, and you'll see that there is I give you a kind of tip on a 18th century method of teaching poetry to young kids. Now, I'm not going to go over the whole thing again now, but what I will say is this poem, and a lot of the poems, I might say that a lot in particular, but this poem, The Echoing Green, I think could have a very fun, if you have a reading family, a fun exercise for you guys, or fun, maybe activity to do with your family, particularly if you have kids from 4 years old till whatever, right? And the adults too. And that is to kind of take what William Blake is saying. I got Wordsworth on the mind still. What William Blake is saying in terms of his, the contrary states, and how a child would react to this and how an adult would react to this. So as a family, maybe read it out loud a couple of times, have kids, either talk about it, draw pictures, experience with it. You're going to notice it's very, very visual. There's lots of birds and bushes and thrushes, which is a type of bird. And, there's a lot you can do with it. And there's playfulness, and there's even illustrations that I'm going to show you that you can show the kids, and then talk to them. What do you think the poem is, what's going on in the poem, right? That's it. And just what do they think is going on? And they're probably going to tell you a very simple, understanding. You'll see it in a second, why it's so simple. And then I want you to think about, with you and your husband, or an older friend, or the old, if you have 15 and up kids, particularly the older kids, and yourself, and take seriously, what do you think is going on? And I want you to, if you are going to do that, I might recommend you read the poem, listen to my reading if you want to, or just read it yourself, and then come back to my reading, because I'm going to have a discussion where I'm going to, dig into it as an adult, kind of what I think is going on a lot, and what we can get out of this poem. Okay, so let me read the poem. It's a pretty short poem, and I can make it sound pleasant. But I'll do my best of a good reading. No, I'm sorry. Hold on. Before I do that, I want to actually show you these pictures, the illustrations. So these are the illustrations that William Blake created, and he handmade these. And then, there was a type of printing press or printing manner that he did. I don't know the technique he used. He kind of invented his own, or developed his own, but he hand colored every single individual copy. Now, this is The Echoing Green in how the way, people would have read it at that time. Oops. So you could see at the top here, you have mothers, you have some men over here on the side. The kids are putting their heads in the laps. The very young kids are putting their heads in the laps of the mothers. You have a little boy on the left-hand side who is, and these are really little, like under 4 years old, maybe even 2-3 years old. And then you have some older children playing some kind of games on the left. You have, again, some older children. I can't tell which ones are women and boys necessarily. Looks like this one on the back right under the tree here by herself is definitely a woman. And you can look at these online. This is a reproduction. So I think if you had a real this is a digital reproduction. I think with the real print versions that are hand colored, I think looks a lot more clear. Now you could see the actual words and how the words are intertwined with the illustration. So Blake does not want you to read this the way I'm going to do it with you, just so it's clear that you're seeing it on a white blank sheet of paper. He wants it full of life, full of experience. He wants you to see these words come alive. And that is a good way to experience poetry, is to help your kids or students, if you're a teacher, bring the words alive. That's something we don't tend to do as readers today. I think it's because we weren't trained to do it very well. which is to picture the words and what's like actually picture the sun does arise. Picture a sunrise. Like that's part of reading. And I think we don't do that enough. Now you can see here you have like vines twined around the corners and all around the edges of the actual text, and you have probably a little girl here on the right side, almost floating on a cloud, just like the piper, a little infant fairy kind of creature came from the clouds. And here's the second part of it. And you can see, now you could see something that we're going to talk about, and I want you to just notice the coloring in the background here. Now, if you're listening on the podcast rather than watching on YouTube or Facebook, that's fine. Go to troubadourmag.com to see the, I'll actually include the pictures, so the illustrations, so you can see them yourself. But you could see there's, a little boy with his, or a young girl or boy with a kite. There's a boy next to her. Perhaps the girls are in green here, which is interesting because now you have the echoing green. Maybe I didn't even notice that until just now, that the girls are in green and the title's green. And we're going to hear a little bit about what green means in the poem. You have this older gentleman here who's kind of guiding them or maybe moving them aside. What do you think he's doing? And, looks like he's pointing somewhere. But look at this big dark thing coming. There's something dark here, even though this is in the Songs of Innocence. And we're going to see what that is. Here you have a little boy lazily lying on a branch of a tree, and he's handing little grapes to a girl with a little halo who's reaching up to get them. And you might find the some themes that are important there that we'll discuss. I don't want to get into it too much, but let's read this in the way Blake does not want us to read it, which is on a blank white sheet of paper here. The Echoing Green by William Blake. The sun does arise and make happy the skies. The merry bells ring to welcome the spring. The skylark and thrush, the birds of the bush, sing louder around to the bells' cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. Old John with white hair does laugh away care, sitting under the oak among the old folk. They laugh at our play, and soon they all say, such were the joys when we all girls and boys in our youth time were seen on the echoing green. Till the little ones weary, no more can be merry. The sun does descend, and our sports have an end. Round the laps of their mothers, many sisters and brothers, like birds in their nest, are ready for rest, and sport no more seen on the darkening green. And that's the end of it. And you can see how I could probably, do that much more ominously, right? Many sisters and brothers, like birds in their nest, are ready for rest, and sport no more seen on the darkening green. And that kind of fits it. There's something like, whoa, where's this darkening coming from? Like, what is that? And I think that's an important, way to think about this poem. Now, again, if you are going to do the exercise, you might want to do the exercise and then come back, or you could get some ammunition and, hopefully I could help you with a reading of this poem. But I want you to think about this from a child's perspective first. The sun does arise and make happy the skies. It's a very like a nursery rhyme. The merry bells ring to welcome the spring, right? It's springtime. It's just merry bells. And you can think about bells in a cartoon. Very simple. This is called a pastoral poem, or it's like a pastoral poem. The skylark and thrush, these are two types of birds. The birds of the bush sing louder around to the bell's cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. It's a very simple rhyme scheme. Arise, skies, ring, spring, thrush, bush, around, sound, seen, green. Very simple. Kids love that. Kids love rhyming. If you don't believe me, give them a rhyme, a simple rhyme, and they will not stop. They will not shut up. Like I made the mistake of, as a teacher of, when I did aftercare for a little while when I was a teacher, and I had like 6-year-olds, and man, I made the mistake of giving them a rhyme, and they did not stop for months. It just never stopped. And kids love rhymes. This is why I think like we're making such a mistake as teachers in the way that we teach young kids poetry. Just let them enjoy the rhyme of it and the fun of the. Don't worry about like who William Blake was and what his time period was. The sun does arise and make happy the skies. That's it. That's all they need to know. That's what Blake wanted, and you could show them these funky illustrations. So, but think about the simplicity. Old John with white hair, right? How does a kid see an old person? They're just, they have all that white hair and they have hair in their nose and they smell funny, and that's it, right? That's what an old person is to them. They look really weird. So old John with white hair does laugh away care, sitting under the oak among the old folk. They laugh at our play, and soon they all say, such were the joys when we all girls and boys in our youth time were seen on the echoing green. Now, I think if you take again the child's perspective, now I could be wrong. I would love it if you with families and students would read this to kids and talk to them about it. And I'd love to hear what kids say about this. What do they think? My view is, to some degree, there is a tendency that many of us old folk give. I'm getting my white hairs to the, even though I don't have hairs up here, but I'm sure it would be white. That there is a tendency of us saying, oh, when I was young, or oh, when there's like that kind of tendency, right? And so for them, from the little child's perspective, this is what they're hearing, is that they're playing, and then they have to sit around and you listen to the old grandpa tell you, oh, when I was your age, right? Such were the joys when we all girls and boys in our youth time were seen on the echoing green, right? But that'll pass, so blah, blah, blah. Now, this last stanza, we get a look at the kids, the young kids especially, and you could see this again I'll show you the illustrations. You could see this slightly with the, kids with their mothers, right? They're getting tired. So the older kids are playing, the younger kids are getting weary, right? They're getting tired, basically. And again, that's till the little ones weary, no more can be merry. The sun does descend and our sports have an end. Round the laps of their mothers, many sisters and brothers, like birds in their nest. So he's comparing, the children to birds coming home to roost, or coming home to rest. And sports, no more seen, so they're not flying kites and playing war and doing anything like that on the darkening green. And that's that dark element, even though this is in the Songs of Innocence. This is about innocence. It's about the perspective of a child. Okay, so, I think a young child will see the spring, will see skylarks and thrushes, especially if you like had an iPad and you could actually show them these birds. They can visualize, oh, here's spring, here's a happy sunrise, and you can hear some cheerful bells. I mean, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to paint a picture. He's painting a picture with words, and there's, an old John, an old man with white hair. He's laughing, so on and so forth. So there's I think a very simplistic way you could read that. I have a feeling that the children would not see too much would not make a fuss like I'm about to with the darkening green. But we're adults, so we make a fuss out of nothing. So there's something going on though. Why is it darkening? Is it just nighttime? But there's got to be more going on, because we're talking about the whole context of this poem, right? So as adults, if we want to understand what's going on, I think we could see there's a kind of a birth, right? Springtime, there's life, and there's death. It's 3 stanzas, makes it very simple, right? Or there's the beginning, middle, end. And, at the end, there's a darkening. You have an old man, and the old man's going to be dying. So you have the stages of life. You have mothers, you have children, you have young children, you have middle-aged, a little bit older children. And you have, sisters and brothers and girls and boys. And so you kind of have a whole life going on. Like, this poem is life itself. It's a representation of the stages of life. And there's a comparison, there's a lot of comparisons to spring. And just like there are stages of the, spring, summer, fall, winter, just like there's that. And this is about the birth of it. right? Spring is the coming out of the first blossoms and so on. And then you have a darkening, you have a death, you have the end at the end of the poem. And there's lots of comparisons to the sounds, the cheerful sounds of like children, just like little birds, but those birds are going to die, just like eventually the children will become the old John, who eventually dies. Old John, laughed away care. What does he say? He thinks about and talks about when he was a kid. So he was a kid just like their kids now. So that means one day they're going to be old John thinking about when they were kids, and then they're going to be dead, right? I know that's kind of sad to think about, but it's true. And so there's the whole life in these 3 short stanzas, very powerfully shown. Now I want you to think about the word echo. What is an echo? So when you go into a cavern and you shout or say, "My name is Kirk," and it goes, "My name is Kirk," and if you've ever heard a good echo, it's like this echo. There's a source, and then it's kind of a diminishing of that thing. But in a sense, one way to look at kids is an echo of you, of the parent, right? Or the echo of the culture around them. So old John is kind of echoing his childhood. The children, their cheerfulness is kind of giving him his final moments of pleasure before he passes from the earth in the natural cycle of living. And so there's an echoing going back and forth. It's almost like an echo chamber, right? That's another way of thinking about it. Blake is making this clear. He's giving you bell sounds too, right? Which have, so to the bell's cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. Old John with white hair does laugh away care, sitting under the oak. So there's an element of the whole, the way a parent might think of this, an adult might think of this, and the darkening part is children are unaware. To the extent we as adults can remember that state of mind, which I think is somewhat impossible. We can kind of remember, but if you take Blake's view, we are fundamentally different than when we were children, and that state is gone. In Tintern Abbey by William Wordsworth, he made the same point that, as we had these dizzying raptures, our pleasures, interests, habits of mind were formed in our youth, but there comes a point when we lose that, and he calls it, we are recompensed with maturity or the philosophical mind. Now, Blake isn't talking about what we're recompensed with right now. He's talking about, in his view, it's not just a cutting off. He kind of agrees that there's a fundamental difference between the child and the man, but he looks at it kind of as an echo, that there's still remnants, of that in you as an adult, right? There's more remnants maybe than Wordsworth would talk about. And so this is how he's giving you a different view of childhood and maturity and the life cycle. So you have that life cycle, and you have, the echo, but what do adults know that children don't? We know more about pain, suffering, death. We know that those kids are going to die one day, right? They may have been told this, like a kid may hear this from a friend or today, and they've probably heard the term death. They've probably seen it on TV, but they don't really know it, right? You can't know something like that until you get older, or until you've experienced it firsthand multiple times. And then you really know the finality of death. And that's something that so that totality of the beginning, middle, and end of life is something we as parents know. And we as adults know about children. And we also know that there's going to be pain. So we see in the illustrations by Blake scenes of early love. Like, we have this girl who's, 5 years earlier, if you're watching on the screen, 5 years earlier, she even looks a little sad. 5 years earlier, she might have been just playing around and not caring, but now she's a little bit taller, maybe she's a little older. Now there's a burgeoning sexuality coming on, and she's a little more self-conscious, right? And you're having even a almost potential love, situation here. I mean, think about this boy giving grapes to this girl. What does that symbolize? Obviously there's nothing sexual about it right now, but it, could turn into that. He doesn't realize that at the moment. They're just being friendly, but there's something going on where that's about to be happening. I mean, these kids are coming from somewhere, right? So if you're thinking about the life cycle of beginning, middle, and end, you got to think about sex as part of that, right? So that's part of it. And with that comes a lot of difficulties, heartaches, breakups, getting your heart broken, not being loved back, right? There's a lot of, complications with that parents are, the parents in these things and adults are consciously aware of. Children have no conception of, really, right? Or very little conception of it. So that is a big difference between how a parent would take it, or an adult, versus a child. A child would have no consciousness of that. And Blake's point is that both would be correct. Okay, now I want to read a quick poem by William Blake in the Songs of Experience called The Garden of Love. Now, this is an add-on. If you want to leave now, that's great. I think we've done most of our echoing green. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. There's always, you could continue talk about who is old John, why is he there, what does he do within the structure of the poem. There's something, important about contrast that we could talk about in future episodes if anybody was interested. That there's something, he's comparing two poems in Songs of Innocence and Experience, but there's also contrasts and comparisons within the poems. So you have the old, the mother, the children. What are the contrasts saying, and how does that, what is the meaning that comes out of that? And we can play with that as we continue this series. Now, some people believe that the comparison poem in the Songs of Experience is the Garden of Love. I'm not so sure, but I wanted to read it to see what you thought, if you were interested. Now, the Garden of Love is one of my favorite poems in this whole series in Songs of Innocence and Experience, for a couple of reasons, mostly because I think one of the great projects of William Blake is to end oppression and repression. He wants you to unleash your inner self, and I'm all for that. And in this one, we're having, an attack or like a criticism of sexual repression. And I'll do an episode just on this. I think I already have, but I'm going to do it again because I think it's that important. I think we don't understand, especially in America, how we are affected by the sexual repression of the culture that we live in. Now, why is this considered a comparison? I've read a couple places that they say this is a comparison. I'm not so sure, but because there's 28 poems in the Songs of Experience, 19 in Innocence. There's not there are some in Innocence that aren't necessarily compared to clearly in a poem in the Experience poems. So I don't think all the poems necessarily have a clear comparison poem between each book. But some people claim this one is because of the tone. So let me read it to you, and then I'll give you a quick little, I'm not going to go into a big discussion of it, but a quick little thought as to how it may be connected. Now we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, the Garden of Love. I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I never had seen. A chapel was built in the midst, where I used to play on the green. And the gates of this chapel were shut, and thou shalt not writ over the door. So I turned to the Garden of Love, that so many sweet flowers bore. And I saw it was filled with graves, and tombstones where flowers should be. And priests in black gowns were walking their rounds, and binding with briars my joys and desires. Now you could probably see there is some connection. It's a person. I mean, who's the narrator in this, right? It's a person who, as a child, would play on the green, just like the echoing green, right? The echoing green of the echoing laughter of children. That's where this child is. But now this person, who used to play on this green, sees a chapel on this green. So the green is not the idyllic pastoral tree with mothers and fathers and just pasture land to just play on. There's now a chapel. What does this chapel represent? Well, this chapel has gates, right? Think about, you can't get into this garden without going through this gate, right? So there's this way in that you have to do. And what does it have? It has commandments. right? Thou shalt not commandments. So it's not, and we could talk about the philosophy of this, where it's not, here are guides on how to enjoy life, how to have good sex and make sure you're doing it properly and enjoying life and not doing it in a self-destructive way. It's another, what we have instead is that thou shalt not, no sex. That's a very religious Christian view. And I know Christians say it's not true. It's freaking true. It's so true. It's crazy that there are Christians who actually believe, who actually think that that's not true. It's very anti-sex, to its core, and especially in the 1700s, in 1794 when this is written, and so there's an idea of, well, now you have this barrier, right? So in the past, these kids could just play around, boys and girls could just tackle and play with each other, and now when they want to do a different type of tackling, now there's a thou shalt not right over the door. So he goes in, he turns to the garden of love that so many sweet flowers bore. I mean, picture that boy handing grapes to that little girl, boys and girls just kind of playing around in a non-sexual way. But we know that there's a kind of sexuality coming very soon. And I saw this garden of love was filled with graves. Now, that's a hell of an image. A garden of love, a beautiful garden that we used to play in, has graves. There's been murder and death and horror. It's a gothic horror now, and tombstones where flowers should be. So these certain type of religious Christian view people place these tombstones and just crush these flowers. They don't care about life. They only care about death. And priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. And so think about that. They're now, priests are using nature to destroy your natural desires and tendencies and, natural desires. So is that a comparison to the echoing green? I mean, in reading it, I think there might be some of it. I'm not 100% convinced that there's a direct comparison, not as much as you'll see in some other poems. For instance, the lamb and the tiger. There's a direct comparison to those two. When you see the lamb and the tiger, you'll see that there's, oh wow, that they have the same structure, same kind of meter, same kind of words, even in a sense it's in the same format. There's a definite comparison here. There's a little bit of a tonal, maybe some themes are going on that are similar, but it's, maybe it's the contrast to Echoing Green. So what do you think? Do you think it is a comparison or not? Now I'm going to so that's the end of this. I just wanted to have a word about Troubadour Mag. So troubadourmag.com, we're going to be putting all this stuff up, YouTube, Facebook, podcast. If you go to the website, you could sign up for a newsletter. I don't really send that many emails. It's mostly when I do a unique little piece of combination work where I do a special video, or when I do like a magazine that I'll put out, then you'll get that occasionally. It's not bombarding you with anything. The other thing is, if you subscribe to YouTube, to the podcast, to Facebook, whichever one you prefer, or all of them, that helps out way more than you think. I am not charging any money, and I have no plans to charge any money anytime right now. Now, that the way that you can give me recompense is, if you do find any value in this, is by sharing it, on Facebook, or if you, whatever you prefer, sharing it, liking it, commenting. That stuff really helps. It makes me know that you actually are listening and you care. And that really helps out. Going to troubadourmag.com and signing up for the email newsletter, that also is excellent. So please, share it around, help people find troubadourmag.com. That really helps out. And again, I'm doing this completely for free. I'm not expecting anything in return from the podcast. So check it out, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts. You can, so if you email Kirk Barbera, that's Barbera at troubadourmag.com, then you can send me an email and give me your thoughts, or you can just, I love it when you comment on Facebook or YouTube, whichever one, whatever format or platform you prefer. Okay, so until next time, and I'll see you soon.